Welcome to Module 17 of Interpersonal Communication, The Demise of Friendships. Just that title, The Demise of Friendships, seems a little odd. If you think about it, most of us don't give a breakup speech to a friend. Most of us have never sat down and said, "I'm sorry. It's not you, it's me. We can't be friends anymore." For the most part, our friendships end, if they end at all, in a very different way than most romantic relationships. A bit later on, we'll look at the research into romantic relationships and we'll say there are very specific expectations for how people terminate romantic relationships. Well, that's not the case with friendships. In fact, it's quite the opposite. With friendships, they either just tend to fade to black, we just kind of stop interacting with people and sometime realize, hey, we're not friends anymore. Or our friendships just kind of go to the back burner. And while we technically are still friends with them, we don't really interact with them. And while they're friends, they're kind of friends in name only. These are the kinds of dynamics that are more common with friendships than other kinds of relationships. Compared to family relationships, it's quite different. Family relationships tend to go on regardless of circumstances, regardless of time, regardless of changes. Now, you can choose to estrange yourself from your family, but for the most part, once you're family, you're family. It's different, however, with friendships. With friendships, as with romantic relationships, there are different dynamics of interaction. And so compared to other kinds of contexts, there's relatively little to say about the demise of friendships. Oh, there is an end to some kinds of friendships, and friendships certainly change in the way we interact with our friends and the tone and the tenor of the friendships. But the research in the demise of friendships is just fundamentally different than other areas of research. And so let's start by talking about some of the common reasons why friendships move to a different state of being. Well, one way to think about it is to realize that certain things bring people together. So one of the things we know in the research is that friendships oftentimes change or come to a point of end when proximity changes. If you don't see people as often and interact with them as often, then the friendship is likely to change. Or it may be that your availability for friendship also changes. We saw previous research that talked about a friendship budget and how people only have room for so many friends in their life. So changes in your availability for friendship also might lead to the demise of certain kinds of friendships. Previously, we talked about the role that similarity played in friendships, and we said that when you perceive yourself to be similar to someone, if your similarities change, then it would make sense that you might not be friends with them in the same way you were before. And so changes in similarity also oftentimes yield changes in friendships. We talked also about how some people prospect for friends according to dislike or disregard criteria. Well, if some friends of yours have put some things in their life, if they begin to change and you now don't like those changes, that can result in a change in friendship. And so in essence, many of the things that once brought you together, the forces that put people into friendship, when they change, oftentimes result in the demise of friendship in some way. So having said that, what dynamics are there that influence the demise of friendships? Well, the first dynamic comes from researcher Mark Knapp. Knapp. And Mark Knapp is a foremost proponent of what's called relational entropy, entropy. Entropy is a concept in physics. It's the idea that says that things are naturally breaking down. They're naturally falling apart. They're moving from organization to chaos. And so for Mark Knapp, friendships are living beings, and they must be nurtured. If they're not nurtured, if they're not fed, then they'll die. And so for Mark Knapp, this notion of entropy suggests that friendship must be invested in. It must be the kind of thing we pay attention to, we continue to nurture, because if we don't do those things, the friendship will die. And make no mistake about it, Mark Knapp believes that friendships die. He would say that there might be plenty of people you never interact with, or you only follow randomly with your social media feed, and you call them friends. But Knapp would say they're not really your friends. They're your friend in name only, but they're not really your friend. And so Mark Knapp wants to make the argument that this process of entropy, this continual breaking down of friendship, is the kind of thing which must be recognized and explained as the cause for the demise of a friendship. So the idea then, quite frankly, is this. You've got friends at Oklahoma Christian. Unless you continue to interact with those friends, go to dinner with them, hang out with them, talk with them, text messages back and forth, unless you make those investments, that friendship is likely to demise. Now think about the friends you've had back home. When you came to Oklahoma Christian, you might have committed to them and said, oh, we'll stay in touch. We'll always be friends. And you might have done some things with them via social media, but it's not the same. And so Knapp would say that probably for many of you, those friends back home, they're friends in name only. Because you've not invested in those relationships, because you've not nurtured them, they've changed. And quite frankly, in Knapp's view, they've withered and they've probably died. Now, not everybody agrees with Mark Knapp's analysis. William Rawlins offers a second dynamic in the demise of friendship. It's what he calls relational stasis, or hibernation. The word stasis, S-T-A-S-I-S, is also a concept from physics. Stasis is the idea that things stay the same, that there's a constant. The opposite of stasis is fluid. Things change, things are volatile. So Rawlins believes, here's how it works. Like Knapp, Rawlins would say, friendships break down. They do. If you don't invest in them, things will change and your friendship will not be the same. But unlike Knapp, Rawlins believes that your friendships get to a point where they hibernate. Or to put it differently, they break down, but rather than just dying, they go into hibernation, and they can be resumed or brought back to life at any point in time. So let me illustrate this by talking about my own experiences with some people I know back in Portland. I came to Oklahoma Christian from Portland, Oregon. And when I was teaching at a university in Portland, I had two very good friends that were also on the faculty of the communication department. And so when I moved to Oklahoma, I said to them, oh, we'll continue to be friends. It'll be fine. But in reality, entropy began to take over. I contacted them less and less. And as I contacted them less and less, our friendship began to demise. Now here's where Knapp and Rawlins part company. Knapp would say that for all intents and purposes, my relationship, my friendship with those two people, it's dead. They're my friends in name only. A couple of emails every year, a few text messages back and forth, that's about it. The friendship has really died. Rawlins disagrees. Rawlins would say that my friendship with those two people back in Portland is in hibernation. And if I were to go back to Portland and call them up and say, hey, let's go to lunch, if we all sat down at lunch, our friendship would be resumed like that. Now, to be fair, Rawlins would argue there has to be kind of a time of reacclimation to the friendship. We have to catch up in a sense, but that period of time is relatively short. And so for Rawlins, he believes we can move people into and out of hibernation at will. In fact, other research has found that the advent of social media is particularly good at helping people move out of hibernation. And so some have made the point that with the advent of social media and other kinds of electronically mediated communication, we are better positioned today to move people out of hibernation than ever before. Now that might match your own experiences, where the people back home with whom you were friends, you still maintain a friendship with. And when you go back home and see them, because you've kept up with them on social media, you're able to resume that friendship in a heartbeat. And so whether you're like Rawlins or like Knapp, there are certain dynamics that are influencing the demise of friendship. Well, a third dynamic is what's called reversal analysis. Reversal analysis comes from Leslie Baxter and William Wilmot. These two researchers want to focus not on entropy, but on circumstances. They believe that a set of circumstances brings most people together as friends. So when I went to teach at the university in Portland where I taught, the fact that I was teaching there, that set of circumstances is what caused me to become friends with those two guys. I became friends with them because we shared a common goal. We worked together. We had similarity. We had a lot in common. We got along with each other. But at the root of it, if I wasn't teaching at that university, I wouldn't be friends with them. In fact, I taught at another university in Portland for 15 years before I ever met those guys when I transitioned to teach at their university. And so if I hadn't taught there, I'd never be friends with them. My friendship with them, in a sense, was brought about by those circumstances and was all about those circumstances. Well, to explain the demise of friendship, Baxter and Wilmot say this: when the circumstances that brought you together change, your friendship will inevitably demise. Now, they're silent on whether you go to hibernation, as Rawlins says, or whether the friendship truly dies, as Knapp says. Their point is to say, if you want to understand the demise of friendship, it's all about circumstances. And frankly, there's nothing you can do to change that. It's beyond your control. So for Mark Knapp and William Rawlins, you can control the demise of a friendship based upon your investment in those friendships, or your choice to bring them out of hibernation. Not so for Baxter and Wilmot. For Baxter and Wilmot, it's all about the circumstances which they believe are largely beyond your control. Now, there has been some research that asks the question, what happens if the circumstances that brought you together are removed and then you come together again with those same circumstances? Well, like Rollins, the research that Baxter and Wilmot does suggests that there's a period of reacclimation, and that when the circumstances are put back into place, then you can resume the friendship, though they would say, unlike Rollins, it's never the same, because the set of circumstances cannot be replicated. So while they do allow for the resumption of a friendship, they would say that it can't be exactly like it used to be before. Well, there it is. Those are the main ideas and main research dynamics that animate the demise of friendships. We've said earlier in this course there's always a contrast, always a tension between universality and idiosyncrasy. So universally, we know there are certain dynamics like entropy and reversal that we can chalk up to the demise of friendships. But on the other hand, friendships are of such a unique idiosyncratic nature, it's very difficult to make overarching statements about those things. And so we'll leave it at that and simply say if you understand these basic dynamics, you'll have a pretty good handle on what it is that is at work in the demise of friendships. So having talked about friendships, we now turn to the next topic of communication research, which is the research into romantic communication. That is to say, the communication in romantic relationships. That is where we're headed next.